World This Week, 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Foreign editor Christopher Dickey is with us. Casual Friday.
I thought, for once I wouldn't wear a tie.
All right, well, there you go. Matthew Dalton's wearing a tie. He's a reporter for the Wall Street Journal. How are you, sir?
A rare occasion.
A rare occasion. Well, you're welcome, as well as Louis Magloire Kemayou, who is the chair of the Africa Information Club.
Yes.
And freelance reporter from Cameroon. Also with us, Claire Byrne, France correspondent for Agence France Presse, the French news agency AFP. How are you? The World This Week on Facebook and on Twitter, the hashtag World This Week. After 1 year in office, back on Tuesday, Donald Trump calling for unity in his State of the Union address.
I call upon all of us to set aside our differences, to seek out common ground, and to summon the unity we need to deliver for the people. This is really the key. These are the people we were elected to serve.
Of course, Donald Trump hadn't yet left the room when the U.S. president was already promising Republican lawmakers to release a divisive House of Representatives Intelligence Committee memo critical of the FBI's handling of the Russia hacking probe.
There's a frontier we cross.
Let's release the memo. Oh, yeah. Oh, don't worry. 100%. Can you imagine that?
Yes, sir.
Last year. He'd be too angry.
How you doing?
How's it going?
And that memo is now public. It didn't take long, Christopher Dickey.
No, and it really is not a very shocking memo at all. I mean, I've read it. I think we were all reading it down in the green room. And it, basically it gets into technicalities about the secret warrant that was used to monitor the conversations of Carter Page, who was one of the consultants to the Trump campaign, who was, in fact, already a person who interested the FBI because of a number of his relationships. But the memo makes it out as if it's all based on this often salacious Steele memo, the Christopher Steele
the UK intelligence,
the former British spy, who was working originally for a right-wing group of Republican opponents of Trump, and then the company that hired him switched over and was working for the Democratic National Committee, basically gathering dirt on Trump and the campaign. But the assumption in the memo is that all the warrants about Page were based on that Steele dossier. And the FBI has already said that's not the case.
FBI has already said it's not the case. And again, we have this incredible situation where you have a public rebuke by the Federal Bureau of Investigations expressing grave concerns about material omissions of facts, a rare rebuke, and Trump answering in kind. This is the tweet that he fired off before going public with the memo. The top leadership and investigators of the FBI and the Justice Department have politicized the sacred investigative process in favor of Democrats and against Republicans, something which would have been unthinkable just a short time ago. Rank and file are great people, he adds. Is this a problem for U.S. institutions? I mean, here you have the president leaning on his Justice Department and leaning on the FBI.
Well, it seems to make very little sense. As far as I know, President Trump recently appointed the current head of the FBI. He appointed Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, who is overseeing the Russia investigation because the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, has recused himself. These are two people who, not long ago, Donald Trump was saying great things about. So, and much of the leadership of the FBI that was there under Obama, many of them have left, have been moved into different positions or resigned or have been fired. So it's a very bizarre position for the Trump administration, the president, to be in. I think the context of this is that the Mueller investigation has dogged President Trump's first year in office. It's been this it has been nagging at him and clouding his entire agenda. And now this is part of his effort and the effort of Republicans in Congress to try and flip the script, to say, no, this is a biased investigation, and the people leading it are biased.
And those two people, are they going to be, because there's all kinds of rumors that they're going to quit or be forced out now, the number two of the Justice Department and the man that he hired as FBI director?
Well, it remains to be seen. I mean, the FBI director is Christopher Wray, has been there. He just got into office. He was just appointed, so that would be very strange if he were pushed out. Rod Rosenstein, that's I think there's a serious cloud hanging over him. Whether the president could fire him or push him out in some way is, I think, a serious possibility.
Serious possibility?
Yeah, but all of this is kind of a distraction. The core issue here is whether Donald Trump himself or people who were working very closely with him during the campaign essentially committed treasonous acts. That's the word nobody really likes to use in Washington, but in fact, that is the whole undercurrent of this investigation. People talk about obstruction of justice. Why would justice be obstructed? In order to keep the question of treason from coming up. This has come up, this, I am sure, at its core, is the reason that so many people in the FBI and the CIA feel so strongly about this investigation. They feel that the United States was profoundly betrayed by the Trump organization.
All right, and in the court of public opinion, if it's the U.S. president versus the FBI, who wins?
In the court of public opinion, probably the FBI. Probably the FBI. Trump's core supporters will always say that he's the victim. I mean, after his affair with a porn star, his religious supporters said God appointed him to be president, so what can you do? I mean, so there is a level of irrationality in the Trump core base that you're never going to get around.
Is this a turning point? Is this I mean, we've seen so much out of Washington.
I couldn't say whether it's a turning point, but just on that question of public opinion and Donald Trump, at the end of the year, there was a poll showing that over 2/3 of Americans believe that Trump has tried, may have tried to obstruct this investigation and may indeed have been, and that his campaign may indeed have colluded with Russia. Or obstructed, therefore. But only 40% thought that it was important or very important. So I think this is the issue as to how important it really will be to the American electorate. And compared to 2 million jobs, 2 million extra jobs in the last year. And
I agree.
Record low unemployment.
I agree. Right now, I would say Trump will be reelected.
Well, I think this is, you have to see it, though, as part of a broader problem that Trump has with middle-of-the-road voters, many of whom did support him, is that this relentless attack on American institutions such as the FBI, other institutions of the government that Trump is conducting from Twitter and also through some of his policies. It's not just the Russia investigation; it's also a number of other on the courts that this kind of thing adds up. And I think if a lot of middle-of-the-road voters are going to be very turned off and have already been turned off. And Trump can't win the election just with his base, and he didn't win the last election with his base.
No, but his tax policies, his economic policies, and the foundations laid by the Obama administration of upward growth in the stock market, downward unemployment, all of that will serve him very well. In fact, the United States will be on a kind of a sugar high for the next couple of years until all of a sudden, the tax breaks for the middle class disappear in 5 years, and the deficit kicks in. But by then, Trump will be reelected.
Well, those are the normal rules of American politics. When the economy is growing strongly, when unemployment is low, when the stock market is high, that normally gets the incumbent president reelected. But Donald Trump is not the normal president. He's somebody who, amongst much of the electorate, prompts a very prompts strong dislike because of who he is. And that isn't just amongst the core of Democratic voters. It's also increasingly amongst middle-of-the-road voters.
Louis Magro-Camaillou, Donald Trump's been in office for 1 year. Over that time, has your opinion of him changed?
No. The fact is, I was sure he would not have any African policy. And the fact is, he doesn't have it. I was sure he won't have any. He won't be how can I say it? He won't have a big realization concerning the African issues, because when you see the last president, each of them led something as an heritage concerning the relationship between the U.S. and Africa. I don't think even at the end of his presidency we will find something concerning the ties between the U.S. and Africa.
So how do Africans feel about him then?
Well, they're looking for him. He said we are shitholes country, so we just watch him doing.
Did that remark sting, or did people just shrug it off? Well, how did people feel about it?
Well, he received the Rwandan president, Paul Kagame, to explain what he was hearing about that, and he was expecting him to translate what he has said to the other African presidents. They were really disappointed concerning the issue, but they don't have a common position concerning it. We remember that Ugandan president said he was agreeing with the position of Donald Trump, but the other presidents really feel angry concerning that issue, that statement.
Final word on this is that again, this is going to play out. Everybody's going to be able to play to their core audience over this, Christopher Dickey. And we saw Trump's tweets coming after the former FBI director weighed in on social media. He said, "All should appreciate the FBI speaking up. I wish more of our leaders would, but take heart. American history shows that in the long run, weasels and liars never hold the field." So
I guess we know how Comey feels about Trump.
Yeah, not a lot of schools or streets named for Joseph McCarthy, the red-baiting senator of the 1940s and 50s. But again, if everyone can just play to their core audience, and as Claire was saying, the economy's ticking along.
No, the question of the economy will be the key thing. I mean, I remember when the House impeached Bill Clinton, the Senate was not going to convict him. And why not? They had the votes to convict him. They weren't going to convict him because the economy was booming. We were right in the middle of the dot-com boom. Everybody felt rich. Nobody wanted to throw a spanner in those works. And that's going to help. That same kind of logic is going to help Trump.
But that at that time, Bill Clinton was also very popular. I mean, his approval rating was nearing 60%. Donald Trump is extremely unpopular. He's got a 35% approval rating. I don't think you can ignore that difference. I mean, Donald Trump is a very unpopular politician.
I'm not ignoring it, and I don't want to sound like I'm campaigning for Trump. But I remember having these kinds of discussions during the election campaign. Right up through October, you couldn't imagine that Trump could possibly win because the polls all showed that Hillary was way ahead and his popularity was low and his disapproval rating was high, and he still won the damned election. So I think I would have to say, all things considered, if things continue as they're going, if there's no major new event, which there probably will be, he probably will be reelected.
And yet the incumbent party, the party of the incumbent, lost despite the economy being very strong. So economics is important for elections, but it doesn't determine everything.
No, but it determines a lot, especially when you're looking at a situation like Claire was describing, where people don't think the Russia investigation, whatever they think about, whether it's true, false, or otherwise, they don't think it's really important to the future of the country, where I can guarantee the people in the FBI and the CIA do.
All right, World War II in the news this week. Russia marking the 75th anniversary of the Soviet victory at Stalingrad, the turning point in World War II, with a big military parade in the city now known as Volgograd to mark victory after 200 brutal days of fighting. There was a big speech there as well by Vladimir Putin. In neighboring Poland, the right-wing nationalist government revising, or as critics might argue, rewriting history, with the bill to punish with up to 3 years in prison those who call Nazi death camps like Auschwitz Polish death camps. The bill's been sent to the president's desk for signing, and he says he will. This Friday, the prime minister traveling to the southeastern city of Markova to pay tribute to Jews killed by the Nazis and to Poles who saved Jews during World War II. The bill, he says, is a rectification that's long overdue.
Holocaust denial means not only denial of the German crimes, but also other ways of falsifying history. One of the worst ways of this lie is to diminish the responsibility of the actual perpetrators and attribute this responsibility to their victims.
Claire Byrne, what do you make of this? Why now?
I think we probably don't realise how emotive an issue this is in Poland, and we got a taste of it a couple of years back when Barack Obama referred to the Polish death camps. In fact, if you do a Google search with Obama Polish, the first hit you'll find is Obama Polish death camps. It was just a massive... seen as
and he had to apologise for that.
He had to apologise, and those words put together, like Polish death camps, are just a red rag to Poland. So I think one could have some sympathy for that. Legislating around that, of course, does look really counterproductive. I mean, this week alone, Polish death camps has probably been uttered more times around the world than possibly in the last 5 years since Obama said it. So they've created this huge kerfuffle, really annoyed Israel and the United States, Ukraine as well, because they're sort of targeted by this Ukraine because of Ukrainian far-right crimes against the Poles during the war too, are sort of targeted in this bill. So they've made a lot of people angry and created a lot of discussion involving Polish death camps, which isn't what they wanted. So it looks a bit counterproductive. And Poles themselves are very divided on the merits of it. You know, while many Poles express the same sensitivities, they feel that perhaps the best way, some at least feel the best way to go about addressing this is through education, is telling people that Poles aren't all anti-Semites.
I want to pick up with the rest of our panel. We're going to have to take a very quick break. We'll be right back. Stay with us. You're watching The World This Week.
Reporters, presented by Mark Owen.
On va essayer de traverser la montagne et puis traverser les frontières. Si on a eu la chance de rentrer, Dieu merci.
Having survived the desert and seas, they are confronted with icy weather. Last year, 1,600 migrants crossed the snowy border between Italy and France. The snow has to melt before knowing how many lives were lost. Our reporters followed some of the survivors of this perilous journey.
Reporters on France 24 and France24.com. Eye on Africa, presented by Georgia Calvin-Smith.
Africa News, your eyes on Africa. And bringing you the latest from across the continent.
Eye on Africa on France 24 and France24.com. The Observer's Direct, presented by Derek Thompson.
These people are processing gold they've mined on their ancestral lands. Up here on the hill behind us, there are Chinese companies doing the same thing with excavators and bulldozers.
Is it possible that local people will one day have excavators themselves? Only the future will tell.
It's on the next Observer's Direct.
The Observer's Direct on France 24 and France24.com.
Welcome back. Before we resume The World This Week, some of the stories we're following for you in the newsroom. In our top story, the House Intelligence Committee going public with that memo that Donald Trump authorized just a short while ago, critical of the FBI's handling of the Russia investigation. All kinds of reactions for and against on Capitol Hill. Smugglers blamed for rioting between refugees in Calais that have left 4 Eritreans in critical condition with gunshot wounds. The conservative mayor of that northern French city blames certain volunteers for helping what she calls troublemakers. After 2 days of questioning, Tariq Ramadan under formal investigation, 2 women accused the Oxford Islamic Studies scholar of rape. And the UK Prime Minister forced to roll back comments made by her trade minister on the closing leg of her trip to China. Liam Fox, who earlier had said it would be very difficult for Britain to remain in any kind of customs union with the European Union after Brexit. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. Christopher Dickey, foreign editor, is with us. How are you, sir? Still
coughing, that's how I am.
Still coughing. Well, it's February. Let's say hello again to Matthew Dalton of the Wall Street Journal, freelance reporter Louis Magloire-Camaillou, chair of the Africa Information Club, and Claire Byrne, France correspondent for AFP, the French news agency. We were talking just before the break. Claire was saying how, well, by banning use of the term Polish death camp, the Poles have
increased use of the term Polish death camp over the past week, anyway.
All right, well,
I think everybody can understand their sensitivity on this issue. I mean, Poland suffered a lot. And not only under the Nazis, it suffered again and again and again. It's a nation that's been victimized countless times, and its people have suffered an enormous amount. But the problem with this is not just that we should be taught to say death camps in Poland rather than Polish death camps. It's that this government in Poland is cracking down on the press, cracking down on the judiciary. It's creating a more and more authoritarian right-wing regime that's limiting freedoms more and more, including the freedom to discuss the Holocaust and to discuss the death camps. That's the context in which this is taking place. And is there a certain amount of anti-Semitism in Poland? Oh, yes, long-standing. And that's also part of the context for this. So I don't think it's just about building off of what Obama said rather thoughtlessly by saying Polish death camps. This is an effort to say the death camps were entirely the work of the Germans and the Poles had nothing to do with it, and the Poles were all good guys and they were all victims. And that's just not true.
Matthew Dalton?
Yeah, this is a debate about labels, and the label Polish death camps is clearly wrong and tells the wrong story about what happened. I mean, the historical facts are that the Poles were largely victims of Nazism and the German invasion, but of course there were some Poles who collaborated with the Nazis. There were some Poles who participated in pogroms, both during and after World War II, against the Jews, and that's something that the government it's not shameful or in any way to discuss that past, and it's something that the government should be working to do.
At this point in time, with what's going on right now in Poland, it comes in that broader context of a reining in of the judiciary, of what we were mentioning, the standoff on individual freedoms in some instances with the crackdown on the media. Is that going to be when is it going to really become the EU's problem?
It's already the EU's problem. I mean, the European Commission has been in kind of like a Cold War with to use a not very apropos term, but has been
no, because they've talked about the possibility of sanctions sometime down the road,
right? And it's over a number of issues. The judiciary has been the kind of main flashpoint, but it's something that that Brussels, at some point they're going to have to address it, and it will really be a test of the EU's ability to enforce and impose what it considers to be democratic norms on countries throughout the bloc.
Well, particularly in the East, this is an issue. Right. Poland, Hungary, the Czech Republic, to some extent, maybe now even Austria. Mm-hmm. This is an issue in all these countries. Actually, and soon conceivably Italy, if Salvini comes in the coalition there, which is likely.
Yeah, because it's there was a piece in the Daily Beast about how it's coalition partners in some instances who are the problem.
Absolutely. That's the case in Austria, where the FPO, the Freedom Party of Austria, has the defense, the interior, and the foreign ministries. And the FPO is basically a far right-wing party, about as right-wing as you get in Europe without having, swastikas. And they're now major players in the government of Austria.
And a lot of these concerns have been inflamed by the migrant crisis from a few years ago. There weren't, in Poland, there weren't huge numbers of migrants coming in into the country, but the EU had this plan to try and redistribute migrants from Germany to countries for everybody to take their fair share of migrants. And that really just, that opened a rift in the EU and this idea of solidarity. And I don't think a lot of these, the kind of political fabric has really ever recovered from that.
You'd also wonder whether in Western Europe as well, there is really unity on getting tough with Central and European states over migrants, over human rights, etc. When you see, for example, Emmanuel Macron, he recently hosted the Austrian Chancellor, now who is not from the far right, but who went into coalition with the far right, and pretty much said, I won't be lecturing anybody on human rights. This is something that Emmanuel Macron says quite a bit these days, and that he won't be admonishing anybody. So then with Germany, Chancellor Merkel pretty weakened, you kind of wonder who's going to sort of really stand up for this stuff in Europe.
And whether it's a seminal issue for Europe.
Yeah.
We're going to turn our attention to Africa now. For a fourth day, and despite a court order, Kenya's top 3 private television stations remained off air for a good part of the day, the government pulling the plug on them while covering the mock swearing in of opposition leader Raila Odinga, who boycotted the redo of the presidential election back in October. 2 of those who took part in that ceremony have been arrested. Post-electoral tension is sadly nothing new in Kenya. Yanking television stations off air and flouting rulings by the High Court, that is a precedent. At NTV, 3 journalists fearing arrest slept in the newsroom Wednesday night.
This is a very unfortunate situation. It doesn't sit well with the story of our country. What we are seeing here is very, very strange. 3 television stations that do command a viewership of upwards 70-80% across the country of free-to-air television. They are off-air, doesn't bode very, very well.
Louis-Margaret Kamayu, it's true that democracy in Kenya is a rough and tumble experience, but the press has been free.
Yes, and I think they will still be free. I'm afraid, but I think they will still be free. The fact is, they were prevented about what was going on. They knew that it was an illegal ceremony. And I think the most responsible person here is Raila Odinga himself. Because remember that the Supreme Court said the elections were not fair and decided to reorganize them. But who decided not to take part to that election? Raila Odinga. Why is he now trying to swear in when he knows he was not interested by the issue of taking part to the elections that were organized in way to defend his rights to have fair elections? That's what I cannot understand. But of course, we have to be afraid of what will happen with our friends, our journalists.
So boycotting the election was unjustified in your view?
Of course. I think it was a bad path for him. It was not a good step.
Because the argument that's been made is that redoing that election we all celebrated because here was an African jurisdiction showing its independence in a presidential election. But the point is, election campaigns cost money, and that could have been one of the factors. That
is the first time it happened in Africa, that the Supreme Court was not agreeing with the results of the Electoral Commission. We didn't see that in Ivory Coast. We didn't see that in Gabon. We didn't see that anywhere else in Africa. So it was a bad shag for him to say he won't take part to the election. It was historic. He had to take part to the elections. I don't know why he decided not to do it, but it is his responsibility.
You don't know why, but you must have an idea.
No, I don't have any idea, because he's calling for new elections. After the results were known, he said he wanted the Electoral Commission to organize new elections, new fair elections. I don't know which one.
All right. The U.S. State Department, by the way, weighing in against Raila Odinga over the last 24 hours, saying they're gravely concerned by Tuesday's ceremony and say that they do undermine the rule of law in Kenya, this kind of ceremony, even though it was a mock swearing in that didn't have the same wording. Where's it all going now?
Yeah, in that statement, the US also did criticize the shutdown of the TV stations, but it is true that their first criticism was directed at Odinga for this sort of mock
because seen from afar, it looks like political theater. Like, okay, this is just a symbolic gesture.
Like?
But you're talking about a big nation
right.
in Eastern Africa.
But why couldn't the government just let it blow over, is my question.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, Odinga showed up to this ceremony and none of his coalition partners showed up. And, you know, they came up with various, what were seen by many people as excuses for not showing up. But the thing is, he was there alone without any of his partners in this NASA opposition coalition. So really, if they had let it go ahead with a couple of thousand peaceful supporters, you know, that might have been the end of this this part of the road anyway for Odinga, who has been looking kind of lonely, friendless with the US not really taking his side, etc. By shutting down the TV stations, it does look like that they've sort of, you know, reignited the movement a little bit, possibly.
Well, I was surprised at how peaceful that whole operation, that whole bit of political theater was, given the history of elections in Kenya. And I think the big concern of everybody was that this was being, this whole effort, theater was being made to provoke violence.
Yes.
Nobody would admit that, but of course, within the context and the history of Kenyan elections, that's what it looked like. And he didn't get the violence. But I think he played this badly, because if he hadn't shut down the TV networks, then you would have had the whole picture of this going all over the country. And if there had been violence, it could have gotten much worse and spread much further in the country. Far be it from me to say that there should be less free press, but this was a provocative move in a volatile environment.
What I think I'm really surprised that he's attacking the press, he's attacking some allies of Raila Odinga, but not Raila Odinga himself. That's what I'm very afraid of. I don't know if he will be arrested, I don't know if he will be judged, but the fact is now they're preserving him. I don't know why.
And there's potential for more tension there. This Friday comes word of another migrant boat capsized in the Mediterranean with 90 mostly Pakistanis feared dead. The refugee crisis has prompted the leaders of France and Germany to often over the past year talk development and giving would-be migrants a reason to stay put. Emmanuel Macron in Senegal this Friday is co-host of a conference to raise more than 3 billion euros to bolster public education in the developing world. Macron for him, it's his 6th trip to Africa since he became French president, and a good reason to come, say the locals.
Senegal is going through some tough times when it comes to education, so we're very proud and happy that Macron has come here with our President Macky Sall to address the challenge.
Education is essential, so having a president come to Senegal, an African country, to talk to us about education and make young people aware of its importance, well, we think it's great.
I really like President Macron because he's ambitious and brave. He's a young man who believes in himself. He's an example for young Senegalese men and women.
Well, you talk about Trump not paying much attention to Africa. His 6th trip to Africa, and this one for this education summit where the French have pledged a 10-fold increase in their education commitment to this global fund.
Well, what I'm looking when I see those pictures is, I remember what he said in Ouagadougou. I'm not the president of the Burkina Faso. I don't have to deal with the issues concerning your country. I would like to hear him saying that also in Senegal. The education of Senegalese is the matter of the Senegalese who are elected to do that, of the government, of the politicians. That's the deal. He's there for a partnership, a global partnership. He has a way to say, but he has, if he wants to really help, to just fund this organization. That's what they're expecting him to do. That's what Rihanna did. That's what we are expecting France also to do. Well, Macron is very welcome in Africa because people are expecting the youth in Africa to have the same success. When you look at the political class in Africa, they are old, and the majority of the population is made of young people. Why do they not have the same chance to become president, to have a very important role in the political life of the country? That's why he's very welcome. But it is not enough. What they are expecting him to do is to push all that in the international era, not in Senegal. They don't need him there to do that. They know how to deal with that issue. What they are looking France to do is perhaps in the UN, in Europe, to help them to be backed in what they are looking for the future.
All right.
I think it's interesting that Macron he's arguably changing the tenor of France's relationship with Africa a little bit. I think historically there's been this concept of France-Afrique, which is a relationship between France and much of Africa that's based on kind of business relationships and often somewhat shady relationships between the leaders of these African countries and very rich French people and sometimes the French government. And I think what Macron is doing here, he's kind of trying to reshape, cast that in a different light, trying to show that France is concerned not just about Africa.
He said it's a security concern, that the best way to stop terrorism is to invest money in education, is what he said in Dakar.
Well, yeah, and that's kind of the sort of more global, fundamental look at what Africa means for France.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think a lot of this is for his domestic audience here in France, too. I mean, basically, he's saying, we're going to educate those Africans to stay in Africa.
To keep them there.
That's essentially what he's saying. And, okay, there's worse ways to approach this issue, but you can't educate them to stay in Africa and educate them generally unless you also have a situation where they have access to capital, where they have freedom to grow their businesses and develop their businesses, and where you eliminate a lot of the corruption that exists in Africa. That's a huge limit on the ambitions of young people who don't have much of a future.
And the other problem they are facing is that when you are in Senegal, for example, you have an enterprise, and there is, for example, they are calling you to build to build a school. You are there. You are in face of French enterprises. Do you think we'll have the same chance to win that market as a French company? No.
Yeah, African small businesses can't compete against those big corporations. And those, by the way, before Senegal, Emmanuel Macron in Tunisia, on the heels of the social unrest in that nation, the one that sparked the Arab Spring, there he announced the creation of a Franco-Tunisian university with the locals pining for jobs and relief from heavy taxes. The French president announced the conversion of debt into investment. He talked about aid, and he also came with business leaders, among them French tech mogul Xavier Niel. Claire Byrne, what do you make of this French tech mogul being in tow there with Emmanuel Macron?
Well, I think it was a pretty good move, because in Tunisia, Tunisia has a very highly skilled young population. And actually, when we're talking about educating people in Africa, to ensure security, keep them at home, Tunisia is very educated population, still rose up in 2011 because there were no prospects for them when they came out of college with their degrees, etc. They couldn't get jobs, partly because of nepotism. So you're right to say that education alone doesn't solve these issues. Bringing Niel, I think, is an attempt to show, it's kind of bring role models to North Africa and show them, how a guy like Xavier Niel, who grew up in a sort of a pretty hard-scrabble neighborhood of Paris, became a billionaire, how, through technology, you can become self-made, you can become a billionaire like Xavier Niel. And so that there are opportunities maybe in Tunisia for people like that
and is there
to do well through technology.
Is there a French touch when it comes to tech?
Is France the new or Xavier Niel's.
They're really selling it heavily.
Oh, yeah, the startup nation. We keep hearing this. And Xavier Niel, he's created this massive startup campus, which he calls, kind of the new Silicon Valley, and there does seem to be something in it, in that they've got 1,000 startups in this massive campus in Paris, which we visited with a bunch of foreign correspondents last week. And around a fifth of them are foreign. And the biggest interest among foreign companies, foreign entrepreneurs, Americans and Brits. Brexit effect and possibly a Trump effect.
Something to think about. Claire Byrne, I want to thank you. I want to thank as well Matthew Dalton, Louis de Margaret-Kemayou, Christopher Dickey. Stay with us because Media Watch is next. And we say hello to Emma James.
Hi there.
Looks like we got the memo.
Yes, the memo has dropped. Everyone's been talking about it on social media all day, hashtag memo day. Mostly, it has to be said, Trump supporters really looking forward to...
that House Intelligence Committee memo that he declassified.
Absolutely. And I think everyone was expecting it to be far bigger than it possibly turned out to be. Lots of cartoonists have been talking about the way in which the Republicans are seemingly going after the FBI. This one from Clay Bennett in the Chattanooga Times has the GOP, the Republican Party, hanging on to the FBI sniffer dog as it's trying to do its job. And this one here is from Bill Bramall in the New York Daily News. Didn't you get the memo, he says to Lady Justice as they're all throwing rocks at the FBI. Now, the Huffington Post headline after that memo dropped was this. Certainly nothing too subtle there. Trump ignores Justice, OK's memo drop. And, of course, it's not a dig at Justice itself. It's a dig at the FBI and the Justice Department. But that use of the word on its own certainly appears very deliberate. As for the memo itself, there are lots of places you can find it, lots of media outlets, including Axios, who've published it in full, which is just as well because the official website crashed shortly after it was released.
Oh dear.
Because of the number of people who were trying to get to see what was in these 4 pages of unredacted text. The FBI had already warned that there were material omissions of fact in it, and that's part of the reason they were so concerned about its release. As for reactions online, well, as you might expect, very much split down the middle. Mike Cernovich, certainly in the Trump camp, says, I read the memo and feel sick. The FBI is completely lawless. There is no rule of law in America. People must go to prison over this. However, lots of other people, journalists, certainly on a more liberal footing, this memo is a dud. And Julia Ioff from The Atlantic says, sources and methods aside, Democrats fighting the release of this memo simply imbued it with more importance and legitimacy. A lot of people really feeling this was much ado about nothing, and there wasn't that much in the content of it that we really should be reading too much into. This is another thing that was pointed out by quite a few people. Developing story, everyone on Twitter is now an attorney because everyone has a viewpoint on this. The Washington Post has already whizzed out an opinion piece on the contents of that memo, and they say it's decidedly underwhelming and at times baffling. In fact, it actually contradicts one of the key things that they hoped to prove, which was that the Christopher Steele dodgy dossier about Russia was the reason for the FBI or the Pfizer warrant. And as NPR really points out here, it actually proves that it was a Trump aide and the Russian overtures made to him that actually prompted it all. George Papadopoulos, you may remember him. He was quite a key figure in the Trump campaign. As for whether we should really view it as a ticking bomb, well, even John Kelly, Trump's chief of staff, doesn't seem to think so. According to his comments in the Washington Post, reported here by The Hill, it doesn't even live up to the promises of those who sold the idea of releasing it to Donald Trump.
All right, something that might live up to its promise is La Chandeleur. Explain that to us.
Indeed. Well, it's one of those things that you may never have heard of. And I must admit, I've lived here for 8 years now, and I've never heard of it until this time around. It's kind of like Groundhog Day in the US, but there are lots of different elements to it. As this
it's ahead of Mardi Gras.
It is ahead of Mardi Gras, and it is supposed to signify whether or not winter's ended or whether it's actually going to get worse.
Oh,
it's
I
actually
see.
Pretty chilly, so it is similar to Groundhog Day in that way. However, there are also matters religious involved too. Gérard Araud, the US ambassador, saying the French today are making crepes to celebrate the Chandeleur, the presentation of Jesus to the temple. So it's very religious, but it's also all about food. Crepes are hugely important over here in France. And, of course, what goes with the Nutella after the Nutella riots of last week.
Your folks call them pancakes, right?
Yes, absolutely. They are pancakes in the UK. But you know, those really, really fine things that you only can get in France, really, or only get done well here in France, they are normally referred to as crêpes by those in the know. There are lots of articles about how to celebrate La Chandeleur. Condé Nast have gone with a good smattering of Nutella smeared all over it. And you do have to wonder whether it is getting commercialised, because there is a reason why we're hearing much more about the Chandeleur than we used to. And it can be used to sell things like Nutella. Ferrero getting in on the act with lots of different recipes. They, of course, the makers of Nutella. And also cider, because you can't have a crepe without cider.
Can't have a crepe without cider, of course.
Le Poin's wine pages are actually going into great detail about where you can get your best Breton cider. So if that's what you want to take a look at, then if you like that tipple, take a look at Le Point.
All right, a commercialized holiday, but it sounds yummy. Many thanks, Emma James. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in The World This Week.